My name is Deborah, and at 24 years old, I was standing in my childhood home with a Harvard law degree and 5 months of pregnancy hidden under my loose jacket. After 3 years away, I had returned to Boston with hopes of sharing my success, but also news of new life. What I received instead were my father's burning words. "You are a disgrace, not welcome here anymore." My mother simply added, "You chose failure, so sleep on the streets." I left with just one suitcase and a law degree in my trembling hands. If you are watching this video, please hit like and let me know if you have ever been in a similar situation. Sometimes the people who should understand us the most are the ones who understand us the least. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood in Boston where success was not just expected but demanded. Our family name carried weight in legal circles, with both my father and grandfather being prominent attorneys who had built a prestigious law firm from the ground up. The Anderson name represented excellence, and nothing less was acceptable. My father, Richard Anderson, was a tall, imposing man whose approval I desperately sought but rarely received. His handshakes with clients were warmer than the pats on my shoulder after bringing home straight A's. My mother, Elizabeth, was perhaps even more demanding. A former debutante from a wealthy banking family, she had given up her own career aspirations to support my father and raise the perfect family. She channeled all her unrealized ambitions into her children, particularly me. "A lady must be exceptional to be taken seriously in this world," she would say, while checking my posture or critiquing my table manners. Every achievement was met not with celebration but with questions about what came next. Our 5-bedroom colonial home was filled with antiques and family portraits, but warmth was the one thing it lacked. Dinner conversations revolved around academic performance, networking opportunities, and maintaining appearances. I cannot remember a single instance where we simply enjoyed each other's company without some underlying agenda or lesson. I learned early that tears were a sign of weakness. When I was 7, I came home crying after a classmate had been cruel. Rather than comfort me, my mother handed me a tissue and said, "Dry your eyes, Deborah." Andersons do not show vulnerability. That night I practiced smiling in the mirror until my cheeks hurt, determined to never show pain again. School became my battlefield. I threw myself into academics, joining every club and competition that might earn parental approval. By 16, my room was lined with debate trophies, academic medals, and certificates of excellence. Yet, even when I won the state constitutional law debate, breaking the school's record, my father merely nodded and said, "As expected." The rare moments of genuine pride I saw in his eyes were never directed at me, but at what my achievements represented for the family name. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother, Eleanor. Unlike my parents, she never asked about grades or accomplishments. When I visited her brownstone apartment, she wanted to know my thoughts, my dreams, my fears. She taught me to bake cookies and told stories about her youth during times when women were fighting for basic rights. "You have fire in you, little one," she would say, tucking my hair behind my ear. "Never let anyone extinguish it, not even those who claim to love you most." When I was 18, just before leaving for college, Grandma Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. At the funeral, while my parents networked with influential mourners, I stood alone by her casket, feeling truly orphaned, despite having 2 living parents. A week later, her lawyer delivered a small inheritance to me, along with a letter. "This is for your independence," she had written. "Create the life you want, not the one expected of you." I tucked the money away, not yet brave enough to defy expectations. Instead, I went to Harvard as planned, choosing law to follow the family tradition. But Grandma Eleanor's words remained with me, a quiet rebellion brewing beneath my perfect student facade. My brother Tom had been the first to break away. 3 years my senior, he had been the initial repository of our parents' ambitions. When he chose to study environmental science instead of law, he was all but disowned. Our parents rarely mentioned him, as though his very existence had become an embarrassing footnote in the family history. We maintained contact through secretive texts and occasional coffee meetings when he visited Boston from his research station in Costa Rica. "They will never change, Deb," he told me during one of these meetings. "The sooner you accept that their love is conditional, the sooner you can build a life that actually makes you happy." I nodded but couldn't bring myself to follow his path. Perhaps I still believed I could earn their genuine love and acceptance if I just tried harder, achieved more, became perfect. So I continued on the predetermined path, excelling at every step, hoping that eventually it would be enough. That one day they would see me not just the accolades I collected or the family name I carried. Little did I know that life was about to offer me a choice that would force me to decide between their approval and my own happiness, between the path they had paved and the uncertain one I would need to forge for myself. Harvard Law School was everything my parents had prepared me for, and simultaneously, nothing like I expected. The historic buildings and hallowed halls matched the pictures in the brochures, but the crushing pressure was something no glossy pamphlet could capture. Everyone around me seemed to be the best and brightest, from their respective corners of the world, each carrying their own weight of expectations. During my first semester, I barely slept 4 hours a night. I prepared obsessively for each class, terrified of being called on and not having the perfect answer. My classmates formed study groups and socialized at local bars, but I remained isolated, convinced that every minute not spent studying was a minute wasted. I called home weekly with updates on my grades and professors' comments, desperate for approval that came in measured doses, always with reminders to work harder. It was during my second year in constitutional law class that I first noticed Marcus Jackson. He sat 2 rows ahead of me, and unlike most students who frantically typed notes, he listened intently, asking questions that challenged even our most experienced professors. There was a quiet confidence about him that I both envied and admired. One rainy Tuesday, the professor paired us for a mock Supreme Court case debate. I was immediately anxious, fearing that my partner might not match my preparation standards. I needn't have worried. Marcus was brilliant, thorough, and surprisingly kind when pointing out perspectives I had missed. "You know, not everything has to be a competition," he said after we won our argument. "Sometimes it can just be a conversation." Those words stayed with me, so contrary to everything I had been taught. We began studying together, and I discovered he was a third-year student, the son of federal judge Samuel Jackson. When he mentioned his father's name, I froze. The Jackson family had been rivals with the Andersons for decades, stemming from a controversial case where my grandfather had faced off against his father. "I should go," I stammered, gathering my books. Marcus caught my wrist gently. "Are we really going to let our parents' grudges dictate our friendships?" I thought Harvard taught independent thinking. It was the first time anyone had challenged my family loyalty so directly, and something about his gentle defiance awakened something in me. We continued meeting initially just for study sessions, but soon for coffee walks along the Charles River, and eventually dinners that stretched late into the night. With Marcus, I laughed freely for the first time in years. He listened when I spoke about my grandmother, about my secret interest in family law, rather than corporate litigation. He never judged my vulnerability, but seemed to treasure it. 6 months after we met, our relationship had evolved into something deeper. The first time he kissed me was after we had spent hours discussing a particularly complex legal ethics case. In that moment, all the voices of my parents faded, replaced by the thundering of my own heart making its choice. I knew my parents would never approve. Marcus represented everything they opposed, not just because of the family rivalry, but because of the values he stood for. His father was known for progressive rulings, while my family prided themselves on conservative legal interpretations. Marcus himself planned to work in public interest law rather than chasing prestigious clerkships or corporate positions. So I kept our relationship secret. We were careful, meeting in places where we wouldn't encounter other law students. I created elaborate excuses for my absences from family events. The deception weighed on me, but the joy of finally feeling truly seen and accepted outweighed the guilt. During my final semester, just weeks before graduation, I missed my period. 2 home pregnancy tests confirmed what I already suspected. When I told Marcus, his face registered shock before transforming into a smile so genuine it brought tears to my eyes. "We will figure this out together," he promised, holding my hands tightly. "I love you, Deborah. I have for a long time." Our happiness was complicated by timing. Marcus had been selected for an international legal fellowship in the Philippines, scheduled to begin immediately after graduation. It was a prestigious opportunity that would last 2 months, focusing on human rights law in Southeast Asia. "I can decline it," he offered immediately. "No," I insisted. "This is important for your career. We can manage 2 months apart." We debated when to tell our families. Marcus wanted to speak with them immediately to face whatever reaction came together. but I was weeks away from finishing my degree with the highest honors. The thought of my parents' disapproval tainting this accomplishment terrified me. "Let me graduate first," I pleaded. "Then we will tell them together when you return." Marcus reluctantly agreed, though his concern was evident. "My parents might surprise you," he said. "They value family above all else." The day before he left for Manila, Marcus took me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Cambridge. He reached across the table and handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate sapphire ring. "This isn't a formal proposal," he explained, seeing my wide eyes. "That will come when I return with all the proper romance you deserve. But I wanted you to have something to remember that I am coming back, that we are building something real." I slipped the ring on my right hand, knowing I couldn't wear it on my left without raising questions. As we parted at his apartment, Marcus held me close. "2 months will pass quickly," he whispered. "Just promise me you will call if you need anything, regardless of the time difference." With one last kiss, he was gone, and I was left to face the final weeks of law school and graduation alone, with a growing secret beneath my graduation robe. Graduation day arrived under a perfect blue May sky. I stood among my classmates in Harvard Yard, the weight of my academic honors cord around my neck, nearly as heavy as the secret I carried. My graduation robe, ordered a size too large, concealed my changing body, though just barely. At 5 months pregnant, I was starting to show in ways that loose clothing could only partially disguise. I spotted my parents in the crowd, my father distinguished in his tailored suit, my mother immaculate in a pale blue dress and matching hat. They looked proud from a distance, as I was graduating in the top 5% of my class. I had secured the validation they had always demanded, yet I felt like an imposter accepting the diploma with one hand while the other instinctively protected my abdomen. Deborah Anderson, the dean, announced, and I crossed the stage, accepted my diploma, and moved the tassel on my cap. In that symbolic moment, I was transitioning not just from student to graduate, but from the daughter my parents thought they knew to a woman making choices they would never understand. After the ceremony, my parents hosted a small reception at an exclusive Boston restaurant. They invited several partners from prestigious law firms, all eager to recruit Harvard's top talent. Each conversation felt like an interview, with my father hovering nearby, assessing my responses. "Williams and Porter have offered you an associate position," my father announced over dessert, naming one of Boston's most conservative corporate firms. I took the liberty of scheduling a meeting for next week. "They are prepared to make a very generous offer, considering your connection to Anderson and Associates." I nodded automatically, the practiced response of a lifetime. My mother beamed, already envisioning the prestigious daughter she could brag about at her charity luncheons. Neither noticed my silence, my lack of enthusiasm. They were too busy planning the next achievement, the next rung on the ladder they had constructed. That evening, in my hotel room, my phone rang. It was Marcus calling from Manila, despite the 13-hour time difference. "How was graduation?" His voice, slightly distorted by distance, was like a lifeline to reality. "Perfect on paper," I replied, curling around the phone. "They are already planning my corporate law career." There was a pause before Marcus spoke again. "Deborah, I have some news. The fellowship has been extended by 3 weeks. There is a human trafficking case that requires additional legal support, and they have asked me specifically to stay." My heart sank. "That is wonderful for your career," I said, forcing enthusiasm I didn't feel. "I do not want to leave you alone with this for longer," he said. "Say the word, and I will come home." "No," I insisted. "Those people need you more than I do right now. I can handle my parents for a few more weeks." After the call, I lay awake, contemplating my options. I had job offers from firms in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, any of which would give me distance from my parents' influence. Yet something pulled me back to Boston. Perhaps it was a childish hope that they might accept us, if they could just see how happy I was. Or maybe I was simply tired of running from confrontation. The next morning, I called my mother to announce I would be returning to the family home for a short stay before making my final career decision. Her delight was palpable, and I could hear her immediately begin planning dinner parties to showcase her Harvard graduate daughter. My best friend from law school, Jessica, helped me pack up my apartment. Unlike most of my peers, Jessica knew about Marcus and the pregnancy. As we boxed books and clothes, she cast worried glances my way. Are you sure about this, Deb? She asked, folding a sweater. You could stay with me in New York until Marcus returns. Facing your family alone in this condition seems unnecessarily brave. If I do not do it now, I will always be running, I replied, though my voice wavered. Besides, maybe I am underestimating them. People can surprise you. Jessica's skeptical expression said everything her politeness would not. She had heard enough stories about the Anderson family to doubt any scenario that ended with group hugs and acceptance. Talk to your mom first, she advised. Alone before any big family gathering, women sometimes understand these things better. I promised to consider her advice, though privately I wondered if she had ever met Elizabeth Anderson, whose disappointment could freeze fire. The night before my flight to Boston, I had a nightmare. I dreamed I was standing in my parents' dining room, my pregnant belly exposed, while faceless dinner guests pointed and laughed. My father turned his back, my mother covered her face in shame, and I tried to run, but my feet were rooted to the floor. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. As I packed my last bag, I placed Grandma Eleanor's letter on top. Create the life you want, not the one expected of you. I wondered what she would say about my situation. Would she be disappointed in my choices? Or would she understand that love sometimes arrives in unexpected packages? The plane ticket to Boston felt heavy in my hand, a one-way journey to a confrontation I could no longer avoid. I checked my phone one last time before boarding, hoping for a message from Marcus. There was none, just an email from my mother confirming the dinner party she had planned for my homecoming. The guest list included the Williamses, a prominent political family whose son my parents had been not so subtly suggesting as a potential match for years. With a deep breath, I boarded the plane, one hand on my ticket, the other protectively over my growing child, flying toward a storm I could feel building on the horizon. The familiar streets of Beacon Hill passed by my taxi window as we approached the Anderson family home. 3-story brownstone with immaculate window boxes and a glossy black door, it looked exactly as it had in my childhood, a perfect facade hiding the cold perfectionism within. The driver helped me with my suitcase, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gathering courage before climbing the steps. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her practiced smile freezing slightly as her eyes scanned me from head to toe. I wore a loose blazer over a flowing top, but her keen eyes narrowed at my midsection. "Deborah, darling, you look different," she said, her voice carrying that slight edge I knew so well. "Have you been eating properly at school? Your face seems fuller." "Hello, Mother," I replied, stepping into the marble-floored foyer. "The stress of finals and job interviews has been affecting my diet, I suppose." She accepted this explanation with a nod, though I could tell she remained suspicious. My father emerged from his study, shaking my hand firmly, as though I were a new associate at his firm rather than his daughter. He barely looked at me, already discussing the partners who would be attending dinner that evening. "The Williamses will be joining us," my mother added, a meaningful glance accompanying her words. "Their son David has just made junior partner at Sullivan and Cromwell. He is quite looking forward to seeing you again." I nodded automatically, the knot in my stomach tightening. Not only would I be facing my parents' reaction, but an audience of their closest social connections would be present to witness it. My childhood bedroom had been prepared with fresh linens and flowers, preserved like a museum exhibit to my youth. Debate trophies and academic certificates still lined the bookshelves, testaments to the daughter they expected me to remain. I unpacked slowly, placing the sapphire ring Marcus had given me in my jewelry box for safekeeping. It would raise too many questions if worn prematurely. As evening approached, I showered and dressed carefully in a black cocktail dress with a strategically placed ruffle across the midsection. The material strained slightly, but with my blazer on, the pregnancy remained somewhat disguised. I applied makeup with shaking hands, wondering if this would be the last time I would be welcome in this house. By 7, the guests had arrived. Senator Williams and his wife, old family friends whose political connections had benefited my father's firm. Their son David, tall and conventionally handsome, but with the entitled air of someone who had never faced real challenge. The Harrisons, whose banking business was handled exclusively by my father. Judge Peterson and his wife, longtime golf partners with my parents. All pillars of Boston society, all potential witnesses to my disgrace. Cocktails were served in the living room, and I sipped water while pretending it was gin and tonic. My mother raised an eyebrow at my abstinence but said nothing. David Williams maneuvered to sit beside me, asking pointed questions about my career plans and making thinly veiled suggestions about positions opening at his firm in Boston. "We could carpool," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "My brownstone is just a few blocks from your parents." The assumption that I would naturally choose proximity to this predetermined life made my chest tighten. Before I could respond, my father announced dinner was ready and we processed to the formal dining room. The table was set with the family china and silver crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. I was seated at my father's right hand with David Williams beside me, a placement that could not have been more obvious in its intentions. My mother had outdone herself with the menu serving all my childhood favorites, as though bribing me to remain the daughter they wanted. After the first course, my father stood to make a toast crystal glass raised high. "To my daughter Deborah, who has made the Anderson name proud at Harvard Law. We welcome her home to Boston, where she will be joining Anderson and Associates as our newest associate, continuing our family's legacy of legal excellence." The guests applauded and my mother beamed. Neither had consulted me about this decision, this announcement of my future made without my input. I felt a surge of anger of rebellion that had been building for 24 years. And perhaps my father continued with a meaningful glance at David Williams, "We will soon have more celebrations to look forward to. Boston's finest young legal minds should naturally find common cause. More knowing, smiles, more assumptions about my life, my choices, my future." My hands trembled beneath the tablecloth as the main course was served. The conversation swirled around politics, legal cases, and social gossip, none of it penetrating the roaring in my ears as I contemplated the moment of truth approaching. It happened during dessert. The dining room had become warm, and without thinking I removed my blazer, draping it over the back of my chair. The black dress stretched across my 5-month pregnant belly could no longer disguise my condition under the bright chandelier light. Mrs. Harrison noticed first her fork clattering against her plate mid-bite, then Judge Peterson's wife, whose gasp was audible across the table. One by one conversations died as all eyes turned to me to the undeniable evidence of my condition. My father's face transformed from confusion to comprehension to fury in the span of seconds. His complexion reddened, then purpled as he pushed back from the table with such force that his chair toppled backward. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, voice rising to a shout. "What have you done?" The room fell silent, except for my mother's sharp intake of breath. I stood slowly, one hand instinctively protecting my abdomen. "I am pregnant," I stated simply, my voice surprisingly steady. "I am having a baby in 4 months. Who?" My father growled, his fists clenched on the table. "Who is responsible for this disgrace?" I opened my mouth to explain about Marcus, about our plans, but my father cut me off. "I do not care who it is," he roared. "How could you be so stupid, so selfish? After everything we have done for you, everything we have sacrificed." My mother rose, then her face a cold mask. "Deborah, go upstairs and pack your things. You cannot stay here." "Mother, please," I began, but she raised a hand to silence me. "You have made your choice," she said, each word precise and cutting. "You have chosen failure and disgrace over everything we offered you. We cannot have this scandal associated with our name." The dinner guests sat frozen, witnessing the implosion of the perfect Anderson family image. David Williams could not hide his smirk, clearly enjoying the spectacle of my fall from grace. "You are no longer welcome in this house," my father declared, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You are no longer part of this family." My mother nodded in agreement, adding the final blow. "You chose failure, so sleep on the streets." I stood there, Harvard Law graduate, accomplished student, their daughter for 24 years, suddenly homeless because I had dared to deviate from their plan. The injustice of it burned through my shock, igniting a flame of defiance. "I will leave," I said quietly. "But know this. I have never been a failure. My child will never be a failure. And one day you will realize what you have thrown away tonight." I walked upstairs with as much dignity as I could muster, packed a single suitcase with essentials, and left my childhood home for what I believed would be the final time. As the door closed behind me, the rain that had threatened all evening finally broke, soaking me as I walked away with nothing but a suitcase and my law degree to show for 24 years of desperate attempts to earn my parents' love. The rain poured mercilessly as I dragged my suitcase down the wet sidewalk each step, taking me further from the only home I had ever known. Tears mixed with raindrops on my face, but I refused to break down completely. Not here, not within sight of the Anderson house where someone might look out a window and witness my despair. I made it 3 blocks before stopping under an awning to assess my situation. My wallet contained 2 credit cards, both linked to accounts my father had established and could surely access. I had approximately $400 in cash, my phone, and the small inheritance from Grandma Eleanor that I had kept in a separate account. It would be enough to sustain me for a short time, but not indefinitely, especially with a baby on the way. My first instinct was to call Marcus, but checking my phone, I realized it was 4 in the morning in Manila. He would be sleeping, and what could he do from thousands of miles away? I needed immediate shelter somewhere to gather my thoughts and form a plan. I found a moderately priced hotel about a mile from my parents' home and checked in, the night clerk raising an eyebrow at my soaked appearance and single suitcase, but asking no questions. The room was basic but clean, with a bed, desk, and bathroom. Nothing like the luxury I had grown up with, but a sanctuary nonetheless. Once alone, I allowed myself to cry properly, great heaving sobs that came from a place of hurt so deep I had never acknowledged its existence. I cried for the conditional love I had been raised with, for the child growing inside me who deserved better, and for the young girl I had been always striving for an approval that was perpetually just out of reach. When the tears finally subsided, I sat at the desk and made a list. I needed a place to live, a job that would accept a pregnant woman, and medical care. I needed to contact Marcus and explain what had happened. I needed most of all a plan for a future that looked nothing like what I had been raised to expect. I must have fallen asleep at the desk because I woke to sunlight streaming through thin curtains and a stiff neck. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Jessica and none from my parents. Of course, they would not call, not check, if their pregnant daughter had found shelter during a rainstorm. Their concern had always been for appearances, never for my well-being. I called Jessica, who answered immediately. "Deb, what happened? I have been worried sick." Her voice, warm with genuine concern, brought fresh tears to my eyes. I explained the previous night's events, the dinner party, my parents' reaction, my current homeless state. Those miserable, cold-hearted. Jessica did not finish her assessment of my parents. "Listen to me. You are coming to New York. Today, I have a spare bedroom, and you can stay as long as you need. No arguments. I cannot impose on you like that," I protested weakly. "Deborah Anderson, for once in your life, accept help when it is offered," Jessica said firmly. "This is what friends do. I will text you my address. Get on the next train to New York." After hanging up, I tried calling Marcus. The call went straight to voicemail, likely because he was in meetings or in an area with poor reception. I left a brief message asking him to call me as soon as possible, then sent a detailed email explaining everything. Before checking out of the hotel, I made one more call to my bank. As expected, my father had already contacted them to remove his name from my accounts and cancel the credit cards he had provided. The only funds I had access to were my personal savings and Grandma Eleanor's inheritance. It was enough to start over barely. I spent the next day in a daze of practical arrangements. I purchased a train ticket to New York, forwarded my mail to Jessica's address, and contacted the law firms that had made me offers, explaining I would need more time to decide. None of them knew about my pregnancy, yet a conversation I was not prepared to have over the phone. As I waited for my train at South Station, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was my cousin Amanda, my father's sister's daughter, and the only family member I had remained somewhat close to over the years. "Deborah, are you okay? I just heard what happened." Her voice was hushed, as though she was calling in secret. "How did you hear?" I asked, surprised that news had traveled so quickly. "Aunt Elizabeth called my mother in tears this morning. They are telling everyone you got involved with a married professor at Harvard, that he took advantage of you and then abandoned you when you got pregnant." The fabrication stunned me. That is completely false. I was never with any professor. The father is my boyfriend, another law student. He is in the Philippines on a fellowship, but we are very much together. "I figured it was something like that," Amanda said. but they are in full damage control mode, creating a narrative where you are the victim of a predator rather than admitting you made your own choices. The conversation left me reeling. Not only had my parents rejected me, but they were actively lying about my situation to preserve their own reputation. The injustice burned, but I was too exhausted to fuel that fire. I had more immediate concerns. The train to New York felt like a passage between worlds. With each mile that separated me from Boston, I felt both a growing sense of loss and strange liberation. For the first time in my life, no one was dictating my choices or measuring my worth against their expectations. The fear was real, but so was the possibility of defining myself on my own terms. Jessica met me at Penn Station, enveloping me in a hug that contained more genuine affection than I had received from my parents in years. Her apartment in Brooklyn was small but welcoming, with a spare room, just big enough for a bed and dresser. "It is not much," she apologized, helping me with my suitcase. "It is perfect," I replied sincerely. "Thank you for this." The next week passed in a blur of adjustment. I continued trying to reach Marcus without success, leaving messages and sending emails that received no response. I began to worry something had happened to him, or worse, that he had changed his mind about us once the reality of my situation sank in. I applied for temporary administrative positions, figuring that my law degree might be overkill but would at least demonstrate competence. The interviews went well until the inevitable question about my availability arose. Once I disclosed my pregnancy, expressions changed and promises to call back were made with averted eyes. After the fifth such rejection, I sat in a park and faced the possibility that Marcus might not return, that I might truly be alone in this. The thought terrified me, but as I felt my baby move for the first time, a fluttering sensation like butterfly wings, determination, replaced fear. I would find a way forward with or without anyone's help or approval. That evening, as Jessica and I were discussing apartment hunting options over takeout Chinese food, my phone rang. My heart leapt, hoping it was Marcus, but the screen showed another call from Amanda. "Deborah," she said, without preamble, "something strange is happening. Your father received a call today from Judge Samuel Jackson. Apparently his son has been trying to reach you urgently but cannot get through. The judge demanded to know your whereabouts, saying it was a matter of family importance." My breath caught. Marcus has been trying to reach me, but I have not heard anything from him. Your father refused to tell the judge where you are, of course. But I thought you should know. Is Judge Jackson's son the father of your baby? Yes, I admitted. Marcus and I have been together for almost a year. The line went silent for a moment. Deborah, you know the history between our family and the Jacksons, right? Your grandfather and Judge Jackson had that infamous feud over the Harrington case. They have been enemies for decades. I know, I replied. That is part of why I kept the relationship secret. Well, it is not secret anymore, Amanda said. And from what I heard, Judge Jackson was furious with your father. Not about you and Marcus, but about how they treated you. The knowledge that Marcus was trying to reach me, that his father knew about us, and was advocating for me, sent a surge of hope through my veins. For the first time since that terrible dinner, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps I was not as alone as I had feared. A knock at Jessica's door the following evening startled us both. We weren't expecting anyone, and few people knew I was staying there. Jessica peeked through the peephole and turned to me with wide eyes. "There is a very handsome man outside who is asking for you by name," she whispered. "Tall, dark hair, looks like he has not slept in days." My heart leapt into my throat. Marcus. I rushed to the door and flung it open. There he stood still, in wrinkled travel clothes, dark circles under his eyes, his normally neat hair disheveled. The moment our eyes met, his exhausted expression transformed into one of profound relief. "Deborah," he breathed, stepping forward to embrace me. "Thank God. I have been trying to reach you for days." I melted into his arms, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with the staleness of long travel. Jessica discreetly retreated to her bedroom, giving us privacy. "How did you find me?" I asked when we finally separated. "And why are you back so early? Your fellowship was not supposed to end for weeks." Marcus guided me to the couch, keeping hold of my hand, as though afraid I might disappear. "When I could not reach you after multiple attempts, I called my father. He has connections at the phone company, and discovered your phone had been moved to this address in New York." As for the fellowship, I left as soon as I read your email. Some things are more important than work. He placed a gentle hand on my now visible pregnancy. You and our child are more important than anything else. The simple declaration, so different from my parents' conditional love, brought tears to my eyes. Marcus wiped them away with his thumb. I am so sorry I was not here when you faced your parents, he said. But I am here now, and we will face whatever comes next together. Marcus explained that he had been in a remote village with no cell service when my crisis occurred. Upon returning to Manila and reading my email, he had immediately booked the first flight back to the United States, a 36-hour journey with multiple connections. My father knows everything, he added. He insisted on calling your father directly, which I gather did not go well. I laughed, despite myself imagining my father's reaction to hearing from his longtime adversary that their children were expecting a baby together. That is an understatement, I replied, and recounted the fabricated story my parents were spreading about a married professor. Marcus's expression darkened. They would rather paint you as a victim than accept your agency in choosing me. That ends now. His jaw set with determination. Tomorrow we are going to Boston. Boston, I echoed, fear coursing through me. I cannot go back there. They made it very clear I am not welcome. We are not going to ask permission or forgiveness, Marcus said firmly. We are going to tell the truth on our terms. My father suggested it, actually. He said the longer lies are allowed to spread, the harder they are to correct. The thought of confronting my parents again terrified me, but Marcus's presence gave me courage I hadn't possessed alone. We spent the evening planning our approach, and early the next morning boarded a train to Boston. The journey back felt entirely different with Marcus beside me, his hand steady in mine. He had called ahead to reserve a conference room at a neutral location, a downtown hotel, where neither family had particular connections. He had also asked his father to meet us there, a suggestion that initially alarmed me. Trust me, Marcus assured me. My father is nothing like yours. He values family above all else, and is thrilled about becoming a grandfather regardless of the circumstances. The hotel conference room was small but elegant, with a polished table and comfortable chairs. Judge Samuel Jackson was already waiting when we arrived, rising to greet us. He was an imposing figure, tall like his son, but with silver at his temples and piercing eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. To my surprise, he embraced me gently. My dear, I am so sorry for what you have endured, he said. No parent should ever turn their back on a child under any circumstances. His kindness nearly undid my composure. This man, whom my family had painted as an enemy for decades, showed more compassion in one greeting than my parents had in years. My parents arrived precisely on time, their expressions freezing when they saw not just me but Marcus and Judge Jackson as well. My father's face reddened immediately. What is the meaning of this, he demanded, addressing me as though the others weren't present, if this is some attempt to embarrass us further. Please sit down, Richard, Judge Jackson said calmly. We are here to clear the air and establish facts, not to engage in theatrics. Perhaps it was the authoritative tone of a federal judge, or simply shock at being addressed so directly by his nemesis. But my father actually complied. My mother sat beside him, her face a careful mask of neutrality. I believe introductions are in order, Marcus said smoothly. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, I am Marcus Jackson, a recent Harvard Law graduate, and the father of your grandchild. Not a professor, not married, and certainly not someone who took advantage of your daughter. My parents' shock was evident. My mother's gaze darted between Marcus and me, reassessing everything. We have been in a relationship for nearly a year, I added, finding strength in Marcus's presence. We are committed to each other and to our child. This is absurd, my father spluttered. Of all the young men in Boston and Harvard, you chose a Jackson. Was this some sort of revenge against us? Not everything is about you, Dad, I replied, the word Dad, feeling strange after referring to him more formally for so long. I fell in love with Marcus because of who he is, not because of his last name. Judge Jackson cleared his throat. I understand our families have a complicated history, but that is our history, not our children's. They have found something genuine together, and I, for one, refuse to let old grudges stand in the way of my future grandchild's happiness. My mother spoke for the first time, her voice tight. You knew about this relationship and you approve. I learned of it recently, Judge Jackson replied. And yes, I wholeheartedly approve. My son is happy, and from what I can see, your daughter compliments him beautifully. Their child will be loved and supported regardless of your participation. The implication was clear. Unlike my parents, Judge Jackson would not withdraw his support based on disapproval of their choices. My father stood abruptly. This changes nothing. You made your choice, Deborah. Now you must live with the consequences. I am living with them, I said calmly. But I wanted you to know the truth, not the lies you have been spreading to save face. As my parents turned to leave, Judge Jackson delivered a final statement that stopped them at the door. One last thing, Richard Elizabeth. Boston's legal community is small and gossip travels quickly. I would strongly advise against continuing to spread falsehoods about your daughter's situation. The truth has a way of emerging, and when it does, people will remember who behaved with integrity. After they left, I exhaled a breath. I felt I had been holding for days. The confrontation had gone exactly as expected, with my parents refusing to bend, yet I felt lighter somehow. The truth was out, the lies confronted, and regardless of their reaction, I had stood my ground with dignity. Judge Jackson invited us to dinner that evening, where I met Marcus's mother, Catherine, a warm, intelligent woman who embraced me without hesitation. Family is what we make it dear, she told me privately. Sometimes the strongest bonds are those we choose, rather than those we are born into. Over the next few days, my parents began a campaign of reconciliation that surprised me. Perhaps it was Judge Jackson's warning or simply the realization that their narrative was crumbling, but suddenly there were apologetic voice messages, text messages, expressing regret, even a delivery of flowers to Jessica's apartment. The most shocking was a letter that arrived by courier containing an apology from my father and a check for an amount that made my eyes widen. To help with the baby's future, the note said, no strings attached. I stared at the check for a long time before folding it neatly and placing it back in the envelope. Then I wrote return to sender on the outside and gave it back to the courier. Some things I was learning could not be bought or sold, not even with the most generous of checks. My child's relationship with grandparents who had rejected us both would need to be built on something far more substantial than financial support or belated apologies motivated by social pressure. 6 months after the confrontation in Boston, Marcus and I exchanged vows in a small ceremony at a Brooklyn botanical garden. My rounded belly was prominent in a simple ivory dress, our child, an active participant in the celebration. Jessica stood as my maid of honor, while Marcus's college roommate served as best man. Judge Jackson and his wife beamed from the front row. My parents' seats remained conspicuously empty, though they had received invitations. I had half expected them to attend for appearances' sake, but perhaps even they had limits to their hypocrisy. Their absence stung less than I would have anticipated months earlier. In their place sat Amanda, my cousin, who had quietly maintained contact despite family pressure, and surprisingly my brother Tom, who had flown in from Costa Rica to support me. "You look happy, little sister," Tom said during the reception, his tan face creased in a genuine smile. "Really, truly happy. Not the perfect Anderson facade of happiness we grew up with." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I am. It is messier than the life they planned for me, but it is real. After the wedding, Marcus and I settled into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Rather than joining a prestigious firm, I accepted a position with a nonprofit organization focused on women's rights and family law. The salary was a fraction of what I could have earned in corporate law, but the work fulfilled me in ways I had never experienced during my pre-planned path to success. Marcus took a position with the Public Defender's Office, his passion for representing those who could not afford justice aligning perfectly with his values. Our schedules were demanding but flexible enough to prepare for the baby's arrival. On a crisp October morning after 14 hours of labor, our daughter Eleanor Catherine Jackson entered the world, named for my grandmother and Marcus's mother. Holding her in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I experienced a love so unconditional and overwhelming that it brought clarity to everything that had come before. This was what had been missing in my childhood home. This instinctive, bone-deep love that asked for nothing in return, that did not measure worth by achievements or appearances. Looking at my daughter's perfect face, I knew I would love her the same whether she became a lawyer or an artist, whether she followed our path or forged her own. Judge Jackson and Catherine were frequent visitors, doting grandparents who brought not just gifts but time and attention. Catherine taught me family recipes and soothing techniques when Eleanor was fussy. Judge Jackson, for all his courtroom gravitas, could be found on the floor making ridiculous faces to earn the baby's smiles. My parents maintained their distance, though the attempts at reconciliation continued. There were more checks, all returned. There were carefully worded emails expressing regret without actual apology. There were even gifts for Eleanor delivered by courier with cards signed Grandma and Grandpa Anderson, as though the title could be claimed without the relationship to support it. 1 year after Eleanor's birth, I received a handwritten letter from my mother, different from the previous communications. It was vulnerable in a way I had never seen from her, acknowledging not just the hurt they had caused me, but the damage their conditional love had inflicted throughout my childhood. I see now what I could not see before she wrote. When I look at photos of Eleanor, I recognize the way you look at her. It is how I should have looked at you, with love that does not demand perfection but celebrates existence. I understand if this realization comes too late, but I hope someday you might allow us to know our granddaughter and perhaps begin to know the remarkable woman you have become without our guidance. The letter moved me more than I expected. After discussing it with Marcus, I agreed to a meeting on neutral ground, a park near our Brooklyn home. My parents arrived looking somehow smaller than I remembered, less intimidating without the backdrop of their Boston mansion. The meeting was awkward, tearful, and raw. My mother cried when she held Eleanor for the first time. My father stood stiffly to the side until Eleanor reached for his glasses, and something in his rigid demeanor softened just slightly. "She has your eyes," he said quietly, the first personal observation I could remember him making in years. That day did not magically heal 2 decades of emotional neglect, but it opened a door that had seemed permanently closed. Our relationship evolved slowly with clear boundaries I established, and they somewhat surprisingly respected. They were not the doting grandparents that the Jacksons were, and perhaps they never would be, but they were making genuine efforts to change. My father sought therapy, something I never would have believed possible for a man who considered emotional vulnerability a weakness. My mother joined a support group for parents estranged from adult children, learning from others' mistakes and journeys. 2 years after that first meeting, we had established a cautious relationship. They visited every few months, never staying in our home but at a nearby hotel. Eleanor knew them as Grandma and Grandpa Anderson, distinct from Nana and Papa Jackson, whom she saw weekly. The journey taught me lessons I hope to carry forward and pass on to my daughter. I learned that true family is not always defined by blood, but by who shows up when you need them most. I learned that love with conditions is not really love at all, but a transaction. I learned that forgiveness does not require forgetting, and that boundaries can be both compassionate and firm. Most importantly, I learned that breaking cycles requires conscious choice. Each time I hold Eleanor, each time I assure her that my love is not contingent on her performance or adherence to my expectations, I am healing not just her future but my own past. Looking back on that rainy night when I left my parents' home with only a suitcase and law degree, I can now see it was not the end I feared but a painful beginning. The path that followed was harder than the one that had been laid out for me, but it was mine, chosen with courage and walked with integrity. If you are watching this and struggling with family expectations or conditional love, please know that your worth is not determined by others' approval. Creating boundaries is not selfish, but necessary for growth. And sometimes the family that truly supports you is the one you build yourself, one genuine connection at a time. I would love to hear your stories of family challenges and how you overcame them. Please leave a comment below and share your experience. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing to see more stories of resilience and transformation. Like this video if you believe that love should be given freely, not as a reward for meeting expectations. And remember, the most powerful thing you can do is to break harmful patterns by loving differently than you were loved. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to write your own.